'Twas a long time ago, longer now than it seems, in a film that perhaps you recall from your dreams. If you find yourself keen to rewatch it this year, well, in that case, why not start here? It's hard to believe this movie came out 30 years ago today. And yet, it's not as hard to believe how it stood the test of time. The Nightmare Before Christmas is today, as it was back then, one of the most unique and original holiday films to ever be produced. Not only was it a landmark for stop-motion animation in its time, acclaimed film critic Roger Ebert once even hailed it as some of the best visual effects in cinema since Star Wars, but it also stands as the only movie, to my knowledge, to classify in many people's minds as both a Halloween and a Christmas movie. Directed by Henry Selick, one of the most legendary stop-motion directors of his era, this film is often referred to as Tim Burton's The Nightmare Before Christmas, due to Tim Burton imagining the concept and very clearly having his stylistic fingerprints all over the finished product. Due to scheduling difficulties while filming Batman Returns and also overseeing pre-production on Ed Wood, Burton wasn't able to actually direct the film, and according to Selick himself, he only visited their San Francisco studio a few times and spent a total 8 hours on the production lot. It's as though Burton laid the egg, Selick once said about Burton's involvement in the film, and I sat on it and hatched it. He wasn't involved in a hands-on way, but his hand is in it. Tim Burton is a director most recognized for his dark, cartoonishly gothic style, both in his storytelling and in the visual aesthetic of his movies. And while largely remembered for his work on films like Batman, Beetlejuice, and Edward Scissorhands, among many others, I think this film, despite not being directed by him, stands out as the magnum opus of his imagination. The concept for the story germinated in Burton's mind at an early age. As a reclusive and introverted child, Burton was fascinated by holidays. Anytime there was Christmas or Halloween, it was great. It gave you some sort of texture all of a sudden that wasn't there before. Burton wrote a 3-page poem based on the idea that would later become The Nightmare Before Christmas, while working on his 1982 short film Vincent. Burton said he drew inspiration from more traditional children's Christmas stories like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, How the Grinch Stole Christmas, and A Visit from St. Nicholas, and had originally intended the story to be adapted into a television special narrated by famed horror actor Vincent Price, one of Burton's biggest icons. This idea ended up getting rejected by Disney at the time as being too weird for the company, after which point Burton would go on to work on the aforementioned films that would jumpstart his career. Burton continued to obsess over the idea until 1990, when he discovered that Disney, which had rejected his initial pitch, was still in possession of the rights to the idea. So, if Burton was ever going to get this project off the ground, he would have to convince the executives at Disney to let him do it. Selick was picked as director, and Jeffrey Katzenberg, then chairman of Walt Disney Studios, saw potential in the project as another showcase of the company's technical filmmaking prowess after the blockbuster success of Who Framed Roger Rabbit just the previous year. Burton initially handpicked Michael McDowell, the writer for Beetlejuice, to help him adapt his original poem into a feature-length screenplay. Creative differences between the two, however, encouraged Burton to adapt his story in the form of a musical with lyrics and score by Danny Elfman, with whom Burton had also worked on several projects prior. Elfman later remarked that writing the songs for The Nightmare Before Christmas was one of the easiest jobs I've ever had. I had a lot in common with Jack Skellington. After Burton and Elfman had co-written most of the songs in the storyline, Carolyn Thompson was hired to rewrite the final version of the screenplay. And the rest is history. The story of The Nightmare Before Christmas takes place in the mythical holiday realm of Halloween Town, a land of spooks and ghouls and terrible frights situated as one among a group of holiday-themed worlds that exist apart from our reality. The leader of Halloween Town is Jack Skellington, the Pumpkin King, voiced by Chris Sarandon with Danny Elfman doing the singing voice. Jack is a theatrical character with a penchant for pageantry and an insatiable curiosity for new experiences. This curiosity torments him as his usual routine grows stale and uninteresting, leading him to seek out new inspiration, at which point he happens upon Christmas Town, a jolly, wintry, Christmas-themed environment unlike anything Jack has ever seen. Jack becomes enthralled with this new holiday and seeks to kidnap Santa Claus so that he can take over Christmas and bring joyful terror to all the children of the world. Aside from the character's design and personality, one of the things I enjoy most about him is that while curiosity and an adventurous spirit are often lauded as positive traits in movie protagonists, and in fact this same quality was a trope of many popular Disney princesses of that time period, here they're presented as a negative. I think that's a very interesting message to have for the leading protagonist in a children's film, that boundless curiosity and yearning for a different life doesn't always lead to a happy outcome, but when taken to an obsessive degree where your zeal leads you to bite off more than you're prepared to chew, it can sometimes court disaster. Jack Skellington acts as kind of the main villain of the story while still being the protagonist. And yeah, there is an actual main villain in the movie, I'll get to that in a minute. But everything bad that happens in the story is a direct result of Jack's actions and obsession. All of the supporting characters in the film are extremely memorable, and even if you don't remember some of their names, you're sure to remember their designs and their personality. From the curmudgeonly, wheelchair-bound mad scientist with a removable skull cap, to Jack's bright-nosed ghost dog Zero, to the mayor of Halloween Town who is literally depicted as a two-faced politician, which is a brilliant visual gag that I didn't even get until I was older. There's also Sally, a living ragdoll voiced by Catherine O'Hara, who acts as Jack's love interest and spends the whole movie trying to stop him from carrying out his plans, only to be foiled at every turn. All of the characters in this film pop, which is sort of necessary considering the little screen time they all collectively have to work with. This movie is short. Much shorter than I remember when I watched it as a kid. With a runtime clocking it at only an hour and 15 minutes, this movie barely qualifies as a feature-length film. But that's probably for the best, considering how intensive and painstaking the production process for the stop-motion animation was. I highly suggest checking out the Making of documentary on YouTube, where you can get a glimpse of just how much effort went into the crafting and planning for these figures and sets, like how they hand-sculpted over 400 different variations of Jack's head to allow for all the different expressions he delivers in the film. One character I especially want to talk about is the main antagonist of the movie. Oogie Boogie has to be one of the most strange and mysterious characters to come out of this film, but also one of the most iconic. With such a simple design, this character has managed to pop up as often, or even more often perhaps, than Jack or any of the other characters in merchandise and promotional material. Oogie Boogie is basically the biggest, baddest troublemaker in Halloween Town. A big, sentient sack full of bugs who hides away in his mansion isolated from the rest of the city's inhabitants. There, he has his 3 child henchmen, Lock, Shock, and Barrel, do his bidding for him and cause mischief. In the film, Jack Skellington, after kidnapping Santa Claus, hands him off to the 3 kids who then take him to Oogie's mansion, where he can hold him captive and sing jazz songs to him. The voice of Oogie Boogie is done by Ken Page, famous for his voice work as Audrey II in the film Little Shop of Horrors, who does a bang-up job playing this character. Every line, every word just explodes with energy and this jolly kind of malice. When I think of a voice actor having fun and losing themselves playing a character, this is one of the main examples I think of. According to Selleck, the character was inspired by a similar character from an old Betty Boop cartoon called The Old Man of the Mountain, which featured music by the jazz musician Cab Calloway, whose song Minnie the Moocher was one of the central influences for the character's vocals, lyrics, jazzy style, and overall aesthetic.
Hey folks, here's this story about Minnie the Moocher. She was a low-down hoochie coocher.
You're joking! You're joking! I can't believe my eyes!
Unfortunately, this also led to accusations of racism against the character during the film's release, with criticism levied at the depiction of a black-voiced jazz-singing character as not only a villain, but seemingly a gambling addict as well. Ken Page dismissed these accusations, saying he had no problem with the role when it was detailed to him. Aside from holding Santa Claus hostage and nearly killing the main characters at the end, he doesn't really have a strongly defined presence in the narrative, and his total screen time is only about 10 minutes of the entire film. We have no idea where he comes from, we have no idea what he's about. He doesn't have any goals or motivations, there's no discernible reason for why he does what he does. He's just a dick, and he likes being a dick. And I can respect that. It's always fun to have a villain who's just a dick. In fact, a couple of Disney's greatest villains just spread misery and mayhem for shits and giggles. But it is conspicuous how little else there is to this character. Apparently, the writers underwent several scrapped ideas for how to fit him into the story. Like one example that got as far as the storyboarding process involved Oogie Boogie actually turning out to be Dr. Finkelstein in disguise, who would have tried to get back at Jack and Sally for mistreating him, but this idea didn't get very far, which, for as little a role as Oogie seems to play in the finished film, it's definitely better, I think, than what that idea would have looked like. This character survives in the memory of viewers purely through his energy, his charisma, his design, and his boisterous but also creepy presentation. And sometimes that can be all a good villain needs, just a strong enough presence and personality to leave an impression in viewers' minds. But the strongest element of the film to me has to be the music. For all the work he's done on Tim Burton's other projects, this film to me is easily the crowning achievement of Danny Elfman's career. Nearly every single song in this story is memorable to the same degree that some of the most famous Christmas carols are. Tunes like This Is Halloween and the Oogie Boogie song are the kinds of songs that you hear them once and they're stuck in your head forever. You'll remember them decades down the line. And I say the same for the visuals too. You will never forget any of these sets once you've seen them for the first time. Not Halloween Town, not Christmas Town, not Oogie Boogie's Lair, not the Hinterlands. Everything is packed so densely with character and charm and that quintessentially Burton-esque flair, which is not to downplay Selleck's own style and how he incorporated his own touch to the film. It can be easy to confuse their styles at times because of how similar the tone of some of their films can be. Like, for years, I thought Coraline was a Tim Burton film before I realized it was actually Selleck who had directed it, and Burton had nothing to do with it. So admittedly, it can be hard to tell which parts of The Nightmare Before Christmas are Selleck's and which parts are Burton's, because they do blend so well together. The film opened to relatively modest success and became a sleeper hit, earning $50 million from its theatrical run against a budget of $24 million, but things didn't really take off until the years since its release. Although it was reasonably popular in the 90s, the film's true success started to manifest in the early 2000s with its appearance in the popular video game franchise Kingdom Hearts. Following the release of the original game in 2002, all of a sudden a new wave of tie-in material, merchandise, and events started popping up to cash in on the newfound popularity of the film, a trend which has been going steady now for the past 20 years. And I want to talk very briefly about some of the tie-in material that's been released over that time, particularly the material which adds to the story of the original film. The first of these is actually a prequel to the original film, released for the Game Boy Advance back in 2005, titled The Nightmare Before Christmas: The Pumpkin King. This game is a Metroidvania-style game which chronicles the origins of Oogie Boogie and his feud with Jack depicted in the film. Apparently, according to the lore of the game, Oogie was once originally the head of his own now-forgotten holiday called Bug Day. In the game, Oogie decides to invade Halloween Town with his army of bugs to take over Halloween for his own. ironically similar to how Jack tried to take over Christmas in the film. The player controls Jack Skellington as they navigate Halloween Town to track down all the denizens who have been kidnapped by Oogie's bug army and stop his rampage. Along the way, you can pick up special weapons inspired by the film, like a gun that shoots frog's breath or a bat boomerang or pumpkin bombs. I like that the story, while very simplistic, does add much needed context to the origin of Oogie's character and his relationship with Jack that isn't really explained in the film. But otherwise, there isn't much else worth mentioning about it. It's an alright game, but nothing special. In 2004, about a year earlier than the release of The Pumpkin King, Capcom released a sequel to the film for the PlayStation 2 and Xbox titled The Nightmare Before Christmas: Oogies Revenge. This game is a much more fleshed out expansion to the mythos, and is a much more thoroughly designed game as well. The story of the game takes place sometime after the film, where Lock, Shock, and Barrel revive Oogie Boogie by collecting all of his bugs and sewing him back together again. Meanwhile, Jack yet again feels the urge for inspiration, so Dr. Finkelstein whips up a new invention called the Soul Robber, an ectoplasmic whip that can help him accumulate new scares. After Jack leaves for a while to go exploring, Oogie takes the opportunity to invade Halloween Town and begin his ultimate plan of kidnapping all the holiday leaders and becoming the 7 Holidays King. Jack returns to a deserted and ghost-ridden Halloween Town and has to rescue all of the citizens of the town in order to stop Oogie and foil his schemes for good. Oogie's Revenge is not only a much fuller gaming experience than The Pumpkin King, but it also plays a lot more with its mechanics and draws more inspiration from the film for some unique gimmicks. During normal gameplay, you go around collecting souls with the Soul Robber in order to defeat groups of enemies and collect items that both power up the Soul Robber and also fulfill side missions with some of the Halloween Town residents. Over the course of the game, you even gain the ability to change into Jack's Christmas attire and his Pumpkin King outfit, allowing him to use present bombs and fire breath respectively. The boss fights are perhaps the most unique part of the game, as they incorporate a rhythm game mechanic inspired by the musical numbers from the film. During the boss fight, hitting the boss will release shining musical notes that you can then collect, which fill up a music meter that, once full, will automatically start a dance battle rhythm game that can deal massive damage to the opponent if performed successfully. And while I enjoyed this mechanic conceptually, I will admit that the timing on the button presses always felt a little off to me when playing. But altogether, it's a pretty fun game for the PS2 era, and certainly good by the standard of most licensed games from that time period. There's other tie-in material too, like the young adult novel just published last year called Long Live the Pumpkin Queen by Shea Earnshaw, which focuses on Sally and her marriage to Jack after the end of the film, and her struggling with her own feelings of entrapment in her new role as the matriarch of Halloween Town. There are even several manga tie-ins by Japanese publisher Tokyopop, exploring different characters in their stories from during, before, and after the events of the film. Overall, the Nightmare Before Christmas has really flourished over the last 30 years. What began as an idea too weird to even be greenlit for production has now become a holiday staple film for the 2 biggest seasons of the year. It's a story that touches on both the whimsical and the twisted without ever really sacrificing either its macabre sense of humor or its childish sense of wonder. And despite the cosmetic differences between it and a lot of other Christmas classics, I think it has that same fairy tale energy that stands out as a timeless and easily digestible narrative about learning who you are and how to be comfortable in your own skin, or lack of skin in this instance. Even after 3 decades, there seems to be no sign that this franchise will die out anytime soon. In fact, just earlier this very month, director Henry Selick expressed interest in exploring a prequel film based around the story of how Jack became the king of Halloween Town. So the passion for this property seems to still be as strong as it's ever been, and while I can't say I'm usually enthusiastic about the idea of a beloved passion project being turned into a franchise money machine, I do think that it's a good sign as to the longevity of this idea and how it's managed to last through the years as something people are willing to keep coming back to. And it will probably continue to stand the test of time as a quirky and yet hauntingly beautiful symbol of the magic that the holidays can bring. So if you're in the mood this Halloween or this Christmas season, consider popping this film in for old time's sake. And if you have kids who haven't seen it yet, then see if they might take a shine to it. After all, it can't hurt to try something new. At least not all the time.